target. QB chasing.
G'day, listeners. This episode is proudly brought to you by our major sponsor, Gym Journal. Please use the code MATTER, all capitals, at checkout, and you'll receive a discount on your next purchase. Please find the link in the description. G'day, listeners, and welcome back to the Matter Mentality podcast, where we talk all things training, nutrition, and psychology to maximize your performance. Today is a very humbling and privileged conversation that we're about to have. These gentlemen that I have before me, I have read their books, I have followed their content, I have read their systems, and pretty much implemented a lot of stuff for our team, for our athletes, and very successfully, I would hopefully add. I'm joined by the founders of Building the Elite, Craig and John. Gentlemen, how are we? And thank you for jumping on.
Good. Thanks for having us on.
John, how are we, mate?
I'm great. Glad to be here.
Fantastic. I love to hear it. Whereabouts are you both? You're both located in America separately, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm in Colorado, in just outside of Denver, so in the mountains in Colorado.
And I'm just north of Salt Lake City in Utah.
Oh, fantastic. There you go. Covering the country. We got guests coming all over from America nowadays. It's fantastic. Now, I pretty much want to we've got a little bit of a short time span than I usually run for podcasts, so we're just going to get absolutely cranked into this thing. I'm a big believer in the average person, I believe, can operate at a much higher level than we seem to think we are capable of. When I took the challenge of reading your book and trying to bring it into our systems, it wasn't the intention to create special forces operators. It wasn't the intention of trying to create elite soldiers, but more so, how can I take from the elite person? When you look at those operational programs or systems, those people, there's a lot that can be taken back from or taken out of those systems. To me, we can kind of break that down and implement it. But one of the cool things I find about even just the title of what you guys do, right? Building the elite. It implied to me that it can be built, constructed. We can develop it, as opposed to perhaps the fixed thinking that the elites are just separate from everyone, just in general. Mm-hmm. Is that on par with the way you guys like to operate? Obviously, it's in the title, but that's pretty much the level of thinking that you guys take on board. Is that something that you can see that person that starts up and go, yeah, we can make you an elite operator? Or is it you kind of know along the way, like, yeah, you're going to make it?
I think there's you have to qualify it a bit, in that if someone wants to go be, say, an Australian SAS operator, if they just got off the couch and they have no athletic background, they're not going to go do that a year from now or 2 years from now. Like, they're going to need a runway. But given enough time or a sufficient athletic background, or both of those things, pretty much anyone can be developed significantly. You can't completely change a person's personality or their baseline physiology, but we kind of, as a population, tend to overestimate what we can do in the short term and underestimate what we can do in the long term. And with enough of a runway, pretty much anyone can significantly change what they're capable of.
Yeah, I like the way you kind of phrase that with the what we can do in the short term versus what we can do in the long term. Do you find when people come to yourselves and they're coming to the program, perhaps not now that it's so advanced and you guys are a lot more well known and the program's quite developed, but do you guys find that people still come to you with extreme goals? You're just like, look, it's not happening, or you get pretty much people are self-aware enough nowadays to say, I'm ready, or I want to take the challenge?
Yeah, and I would say it depends. As we've grown, we actually have more clients from a variety of different goals, and age usually plays a big role in this, is what I would say. As you get a little bit older, you just have more experience, right? And so you have a better idea of what your true strengths and weaknesses are, and you're more aware of what it might take to do something potentially really challenging. So, for example, in Australia, to make it through Australian SAS selection, you already have to be in the military, and generally they're a little bit older population. By older, I mean they're still young, but they're not 18. Whereas in the United States, the population, like you can go straight out into the military and go try to be an Army Ranger or Special Forces or Navy SEAL when you're 18 years old, and many of them are. And so the difference there is that they haven't been in the military and they're far less experienced. And so oftentimes they're less aware of really what they're getting themselves into and what's going to be required physically, mentally, and emotionally to be successful at those things. So I would say over time, it's not so much honestly that people are more self-aware. We just have a wider diversity, and it kind of depends on background and what they're going for. But a big part of our program is to be honest with people, and we have to have objective standards, and to get a contract for just to get the opportunity to show up at any one of these selection courses, you have to meet minimum requirements. And we frame them in that way, in which they're the absolute minimums. They're not an indicator that you are going to be successful. They're the basement, right? Like this is a starting point at which you can start thinking that you are on trajectory for your goal, but you are not necessarily ready to show up and do well. Hopefully that answers your question.
No, absolutely, because it leads to kind of like my next question. One of the things that I find, and it's never to seem pretentious or like belittling anyone in their approaches, but I often find people that start with us, they seem to settle for the bare minimum. They seem to settle or think that the bare minimum is good enough. Obviously, for you guys, as you sort of stated there, the bare minimum is just to get maybe an entry ticket. It's maybe the opportunity you could do it. Is that a fair reflection? When people are coming to you guys, they're just scraping by. They're almost proud of the bare minimum, or they come in and go, "I want to be above this. I want to excel way past this. Like this is where the bare minimum is. I'm looking at raising that bar."
I think again, it would vary by the person. We do see some people where their perception of it is they need to meet, like, say there's a screen test for almost any of these programs. The Australian version is actually brutal. Like you have to be really fit to make it through the Aussie. It's called the SFET. But in the US, some of them are a little less rigorous, where it's like a 500-meter swim, mile-and-a-half run, and it's not that big of a deal. And we definitely see people where they think that if they can pass those minimum standards, then they're good to go, and they're gonna have an easy time in selection, or they're gonna be well qualified for selection. But that's not the case. Those are just the entry stakes, and if you're squeaking by those minimum standards, then you're probably going to suffer a lot unnecessarily in selection. But that is not the case for everyone. Like a lot of our clients show up knowing that their goal is to excel, not survive,
Mhm.
and that they want to crush, those somewhat arbitrary tests like the SFED or the screen tests in the US. Like they want to blow right past those, and they shouldn't be much more than a minor speed bump. So it varies a lot by person. And as John said, age and maturity often plays a big role in that.
And with that, like we've already kind of touched on, I was going to get to this a bit further down the track, but given my background, and listeners already know that my degree is in clinical psychology. One of the big things I literally just finished the semester last year on personality and identity. Do you guys? Well, I don't know in your book you do, but I'd love to expand on it. Do you guys identify or have started to identify a trend of personality traits that do exceed, that do excel, that obviously make it a little bit further? I know in bodybuilding, I've started to put together a program kind of similar to what you guys do, with trying to uh, set almost like a psychological prescript, or like a psychological concept that you are able to handle this, so that you will kind of succeed. And to us, it's usually a high level of conscientiousness, usually a low level, mid level of neuroticism. But the neuroticism is mostly because we inherently come with almost an emotion stability about our appearance, to where it kind of festers from. Obviously,
Hmm.
not ideal, it's not the perfect world, but that generally leads to someone wanting to improve their physique. For you guys, I know in the book that it's usually a lower emotional instability. So obviously, they have that higher emotional control and stability. So do you guys identify that's pretty consistent, that those successful ones are, high conscientiousness, low neuroticism? I would love to expand on if you guys think agreeableness plays a role, because obviously in the sense of being military discipline, debating and arguing with your sergeants, the commanding roles obviously isn't ideal. But guys who are probably a bit more out there thinking, operators perhaps might be a little less agreeable. But just
Mhm.
what your thoughts are there. If that's a common trend that high conscientiousness is the successful trade.
Agreeableness, it's not as predictive as conscientiousness and emotional stability, but it does play a role. And it's primarily a specific form of it. I just had a conversation with this former DevGru SEAL named Rich Davini, and he was a green team commander, so he oversaw the guys who were screening into SEAL Team 6, or what's called DevGru now. And one of the traits that he identified as being important was what he called insouciance, which means like I can't even remember the Webster's definition of it, but basically not caring what other people think of you or
Mm,
not caring about external criticism, because these selection environments are designed to either be completely devoid of positive feedback or feedback at all, which can be tough for some people, or they're aggressively giving you as much negative
yeah.
feedback as they can. And they create this mirage designed to convince you that you suck, that you're a terrible person, that you shouldn't be here, that you don't belong, you're not strong enough, you're not good enough, you never will be, and you should just do the right thing and go away. And people who are high in that particular form of agreeableness, where they're susceptible to the negative feedback coming from other people and they're prone to believe them or kind of listen to what they're telling them, are more susceptible to that message. They're more likely to say, like, everyone here who is an authority figure says that I suck. And they're probably right. They start to agree
Mm,
and they take that message at heart and they quit. Where the people who will listen to negative feedback all day and just don't care, or they'll use it as fuel and just prove them wrong, higher in what Rich calls insouciance, they tend to do better, especially in those particular courses. Like Buds is a really strong example of that, where the feedback is just aggressively negative. So it depends on the environment, but in those courses where there's a guy with a bullhorn telling you that you suck forever, agreeableness can be a negative risk factor, or low agreeableness is a positive trait.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would not have thought of or looked at it from that perspective, in the sense of agreeable being that type of all of the approach of agreeableness in that regard. Um, yeah, we're
There
seeing.
is a there is a component of sociability where, so another course, like say Army Special Forces in the US, where team dynamics and social dynamics, your ability to get along with a group are important. In that case, it's less of an important that like insouciant thing is less of an
Yeah,
important variable, and being able to get along with people, like your sociability is
mm.
important, and sociability or gregariousness is a specific subset of agreeableness that they're looking for, will correlate with success there. So it depends a lot on exactly what course you're doing and the psych profile that's fitted for it.
So do you guys in that regard, even just deviating the point just there a little bit, John? I know with your background, you do a lot of the programming, you do a lot of the I guess the development of the programs from the exercise perspective. Are you guys developing based on the particular course, the particular program, or are you guys individualizing? I know the answer. I've kind of put it into the book. Sorry, taken it from the book. Are you guys individualizing based on the athlete, the operator, the candidate, or are you isolating based on the I guess the field, the track, the course, the program?
Yeah, I mean, it really has to be both, because the standards and the things that they're training for are what they are. So the course isn't going to change based on the individual that shows up, right? So they just have to be capable of navigating whatever physical challenges are specific to that course. And so we do have to have a really good idea for every course of what the landscape of possible things looks like, right? So that we can build someone with the physiological capacities that give them a good shot at being successful, right? But there's a lot of different paths to that specific place. And to your point, this kind of gets back to profiling people and having an idea of where they're at and what they're biased toward, right? So some courses are very, very running heavy, for example, and some are have a swimming component, water component, or some are more balanced or have a lot of land-based rucking stuff. And not all body types and backgrounds are going to be equally good at all of these things, regardless of training history, background, or how amazing our program is, right? So some of it is just being honest with people about this is what this course is. It's not going to change for you, no matter how awesome you are as a person. And these are the standards, and we have to be able to get to this place, right? And that's why some courses, the same way psychologically, they're a better fit for some individuals. Physically, some courses are a better fit. But once we know what the course is, we look at what the individual is, and then from there, we have to individualize their training, because there's just no average program that's going to work, honestly, for anyone. And if you do that, if you create the average program, it actually is kind of the wrong program for literally 100% of people. And so whether or not we're in our app or we're doing fully individualized training, we provide some level of individualization no matter what. And so that's kind of taking a step back. From a complexity perspective, we want to identify what the limiting factor in the system is, or what's the biggest area where we have the most leverage, right? Where if we make this one change, it can create a cascade of things. And then while we maintain other qualities. And so that's what we always focus on. And then we periodically reassess, see if what we're doing is working, because we're always making assumptions. Like, we know training is what it is and physiology is what it is, but you still don't know all the pieces at play, right? Just because the principles work for most people doesn't mean they always do. And we can go on a rabbit hole here of physiology and talk about why those things happen. But the point is that if you're assessing people, you put them through a program, and then you reassess, you have an objective process to know whether or not you're doing is working. And then you're working towards objective outputs of minimums, or even, and again, we set our minimums much higher than the minimums required to get in the courses, of where we know they need to be physically. It's a clear process, right? And there's clear transparency there for everyone. They know what's working, what's not working, and then we can iterate and make adjustments over time.
So to kind of put in perspective, people that are listening, because I have a lot of coaches, educators, and stuff that follow me myself, but in our realm of coaching, even at the elite level, at the highest of what I would deem elite performance, because there is something unique, borderline psychotic, and just intense about what the SOF does. And the idea that even at that level, you guys are individualizing, isolating, identifying, and systematically and methodologically attacking the individual athlete or operator. One of the biggest mistakes I find in our space is that people think they can just copy paste, and it'll be, it's probably even in your realm as well. We have the kind of high and low bars of acceptable coaching and acceptable development. Unfortunately, to me, I see it as a very common practice that people just think, like, I've got 200 clients, I can just go copy, Control C, Control V. That program fits that person because I have a kind of template. To me, I will generally have a similar approach where I'll look at the physique, at the performance aspect that we're trying to achieve. I might have a similar program that matches, but then I'm also looking at that and going, from that maybe baseline, does this fit the bill of this person, or do I need to change based on the gym they train at, based on the environments they're in, based on weaknesses that they currently have, or areas we need to improve? So even at my most baseline, I guess, of templating, if we would refer to it as that, I then individualize and isolate to the athlete or the individual I'm working with. For you guys to hear that even at your level of what you do and what you guys have built, that special forces don't even remotely have a kind of copy paste or any sort of templating style system is beyond what I believe coaching accepts. It's so important to me that I think that people individualize and isolate their athlete or their individual. I don't know about you guys, but to me, if you can't do that, I think you're overstretching as a coach. I think you're overstretching that degree where you're pushing your boundaries of what your quality is being provided as. I'm not sure. You guys, please expand on that for me if you can. But I feel like if I'm not able to isolate and individualize for my clients, I'm not serving them properly, and I'm probably stretched too thin.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, one of the things that we keep in mind, especially with our one-on-one clients, where there's a lot more individualization, is there are a lot more variables than how good they are at exercising. Um, like if you're trying to get someone through a soft selection course, all of these other things matter, like their mental skills, their emotional skills, their nutrition, their sleep quality, all of these other pieces. And then, even within the physical side, as you're aware, there is a lot of individualization that happens in there too. People have different movement issues, they have different joint ratios, injury histories, all of these things change, and all of the details matter. Like if you get everything right, but this person's nutrition is terrible, or they've ruined their back as soon as they have a heavy ruck on for a day, or like it's easier to break a system than to put it back together. And if you let one of those unaddressed or unacknowledged variables come in and interfere with what you're trying to do, then you could end up ruining the entire effect. So, yeah, our way of individualizing, even though people are all going to the same destination for a given program, usually involves variables well outside of just, like what kind of barbell lift they're doing that day or
Yeah.
something like that too.
Yeah, I think you've really just touched on an important point there. This is a philosophy that, hopefully it's obvious given the background of study that I do, even though the people I work with, we share a very similar approach to the holistic attack, I guess, or the holistic approach towards coaching. I think in our space, one of the problems that is quite consistent is that, we might get someone with an exercise science degree, might get someone with a nutrition science degree, and their focus is on X and O's. And it ends up being like, we're coaching the person, here's the max sets and reps, we're going to work at this velocity and this intensity and, perform with this power and explosiveness. But then when we look at that system, right, we look at the systemization of the body. A psychosomatic relationship is not separate. What if that person comes to the field, comes to the track, comes to the gym, comes to the operation theater, and horrible sleep? They've had a fight with their spouse the night before. They've underate the day before. They've had all these individual aspects that contribute to the performance, but a lot of the time coaches get so caught up in the X and O's. It should be perfect today. That's great in theory. Yes, you're correct, but if we're not addressing the stresses, the anxieties, the lack of arousal, the lack of being present, like the lack of mindfulness in where they are, and they're kind of the brain's over here, but the target's over there, they're not going to perform optimally. And I think that's a huge credit that I would love you guys to kind of expand on how you got to that reality or realization that it's beyond just training and nutrition. For us, like our pinnacle triangle or pyramid, if you will, we call it the matter triad, which is basically psychology, training, and nutrition is how we approach coaching. I see it in the book. It's very similar to you guys, and perhaps I've even taken it from there. I won't even deny that. But I'd love you guys to kind of expand on that because we've touched on personality, we've touched on these things, and they all contribute to the outcome of an operator or a client.
Yeah, I mean, you can never separate any one variable. It's how everything works together is what matters. So the way I came to realize this was like as a college athlete, I got hurt a bunch and had a bunch of surgeries, and it wasn't from a lack of trying or effort, right? So I'd show up every day and do everything the PT, strength coach, everyone, my sport coach, everyone told me to do, at absolute max intensity all the time. And that did not necessarily lead to good outcomes. And it's because I had all these disparate pieces working independent of each other and not working together to identify what we talked about earlier was the limiting factor with me as a human being, right? Like all those things mattered, but done independently and without working together with a bigger picture of what thing was going to be the limiting factor, they all kind of actually made everything worse. And so after like 5 surgeries and spending a bunch of time on that, I luckily in my senior year of college I was helping a guy by the name of Kimi Sato. He was doing his PhD dissertation in biomechanics, and his background was a strength coach. And he just had this unique perspective. He was known as like the wizard. And we were going down to the Olympic Training Center and working with athletes on there. And they'd literally send him anyone they couldn't fix. And it's because he would take the athlete and be like, cool, we're going to do a physiology screens. Let's look at where you're physiologically at across the board. Even if it was like a weightlifter, right? And the weightlifting coach would be like, yeah, man, what's the problem? They lift weights. I don't care how aerobically fit they are, right? And he'd look at nutrition. He'd talk to them, get an idea of what's going on in their life. He'd look at the biomechanics, all the things, and then identify what the limiting factor was. And then he'd like oftentimes wouldn't work with them. He'd be like, okay, you need to go work with a nutritionist, or you're going to go do conditioning, or you need to go talk with a therapist, or whatever it was. And I was like, this guy's like the wizard, right? Like he's putting all these these pieces together. And what he really was doing was just taking a step back, and instead of being the specialist and trying to fix everything, like he had a full set of tools, right? And even if he didn't have that specific skill set, he was able to look at the bigger picture and see the person as a human being and identify what their potential limiting factor was, and then go, give them the appropriate intervention so they could actually be successful. And so that kind of set me down the path. And that's actually how I met Craig, because I knew nothing about performance psychology. And I had read some of Craig's stuff. And so I reached out to him. And then we started working together. But yeah, that's our approach. And that's why we always take a look at the big picture, because you can be doing whatever it is that you're the specialist at. You could be unbelievably good at it. You could have the world's best program, but if it is not what that client needs, it is going to be completely useless and maybe even counterproductive or harmful. And so while you don't have to be the specialist, and I think that's oftentimes what happens to us as coaches, is we can obsess and be like, oh, now I got to learn this, and I got to learn this, and I got to learn this, and I got to learn, and you don't. Your goal is to just understand the bigger picture and then to create a network. And then you can be that person who helps clients identify the thing that is really holding them back. And then that will allow you to be far more successful at the thing you're actually good at. Your clients get way better results, and everything will become better. And then you don't have to take on the responsibility of something that's outside your scope.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point there. Is obviously sticking inside the scope, but being able to understand your individual, your athlete, your operator, whoever you're working with. I think that's such an important understanding to be able to look at them and say, I can recognize, or just by asking the right questions, having the right data to track, having the right information. Big thing that we had that I found was lacking in our space was qualitative and quantitative questionnaires for check-ins for clients. Because I'd get clients that on paper, these calories should make sense, this nutrition should make sense, this training program, you should be progressing. And it's like, I've written you a 5-day program, I've put this together, we've got total set volume equated for, we're managing fatigue, we're deloading when necessary. Why is this not progressing? And then it would get to a monthly catch up, or we get to a call, and we'd have that communication, and they would wait till the call to talk to me, but B, it would be my a very extreme example that everyone knows about. I've not really hit it is during one of my training phases, my father passed away, and to me, I was very big on like athletic history. To me, it was like that's a non-issue. But I also realized as a coach, not everyone's me. And so I had to like take that step back and look out, as you kind of said there, is zoom out a little bit and realize that those stress factors, those lifestyle factors, the intricate system of just the environmental ecological model, we're looking at and going, okay, this all contributes to this person. What are they experiencing this week in their life? And perhaps it was, a family member passed away, they had a breakup, they had a divorce, they had a fight with a child, whatever it might be. They got fired from their job. Having them stick to that 5-day program probably isn't going to happen this week. Do we get mad about it? Do we attack them for it, call them an unmotivated, poorly driven client? Or do we say, hey, you know what, let's just do 2 days this week and let's take some time, go for a walk, watch a movie, get a massage, go to the beach, ground your feet somewhere that's going to bring you back to reality a little bit, take center and, just kind of control your emotions. And I think that's a huge factor that a lot of coaches miss, which is what I love about the systematic approach you guys have, is that it's a lot more of that, yes, here's the X and O's. The physiological side does matter, but as just as equally important is how that psychological coping strategy is, or what they're doing to relax themselves, deal with stress, deal with anxiety, battle these issues, and still be able to perform in the gym.
Yeah, that's a factor that we deal with a lot with our, like young, hard charging special ops clients. is getting them to put the brakes on periodically and stop trying to do all of the things all of the time. There are times when we have to have like pretty forceful conversations, getting them to take time off and take care of themselves, or like they're going on a vacation for a week with their family and they're like, if I bring a backpack and I bring a sandbag, I can fill it with rocks and I can do all this and I can like never see my family the whole time because I'll be working out. And we're like, how about you don't? Like maybe you should take care of yourself and your social relationships and your family and stuff as well. Yeah. And it does matter, and it is an important part of the coaching process.
I think even one of the important aspects you guys do touch on is your mental skills development, which becomes so important, which is, I would argue to a degree, that emotional regulation of you being able to identify that you do need to take that step back. Obviously, being highly aroused and excitable and charged at a young age, reacting to that or only acting on that versus understanding how to pull yourself back, control yourself, and not just be driven by that impulse all the time is an important skill to have. So you know when to push, when to pull, sort of take the brakes off. That realm, again, I think is something that's very lacking in the coaching space of trying to, yes, it's outside scopes, I understand that, but just having some skills or a repertoire of tools that you can use for clients to teach them that you guys do so well. I've taken a multitude of them myself, but I think that's a huge area that you guys nail quite well, especially at the operator level. Like being able to teach those things is so important. But just how important is mental skills development? And obviously, that's an umbrella term for a lot of different skills in there that we could spend a whole lecture on talking about. But just how important for the athlete, client, person, even a coach, is mental skills development?
You want to take this, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I'll take it, sure. I mean, it's as important or more important than what you're doing. So how you do everything is as important as what you're doing, right? And most people think that when they're going to do exercise, it depends on their frame, right? Some people just legitimately enjoy it, but even the people who enjoy it tend to think harder is better, right? And the more difficult something is, the more value there is in it. And it might sound weird, but we take kind of the opposite approach. Our goal here with all of our clients is try to make objectively hard things feel as easy as possible, not how to do something that is moderately difficult and make it feel really hard. And the only way to do that is to learn how to regulate your what is happening in your mind. When it comes to like things like pain and fatigue, they're just like emotions. They are not these objective things that happen to us where everyone experiences them the same. So, you could have two people identical twins, same genetics, same background, training history, doing the same workout. And one of them can just be dying and the other one at the same outputs and the other one can be just cruising along doing just fine. And the difference is what is happening in their mind, not physiologically what is occurring to them, but it does actually have physiological ramifications because what happens in your mind happens in your bloodstream and then it becomes a feedback loop, right? So if I am amplifying the difficulty of something, if I am seeing the more pain that I am in as a positive thing and then leaning into that pain, then I am amplifying my stress response and I'm making something feel harder and harder and harder. And that means it costs me more during the activity. Some people see this as something to run away from, right? Like they want to punish themselves and they want to avoid it, or they see pain and fatigue as a bad thing and they try to avoid it. But none of that is helpful, right? The goal here is to learn how to objectively do difficult things and learn how to manage that and be right in that sweet spot where it's difficult and you're working hard, but you're present and you're able to, we call this like active coping versus passive coping, right? That's kind of like an umbrella term of what we're really looking for here. And when you're actively coping with the situation, you're focusing on what you can, like the two main factors that will crank up or reduce your degree of stress is your sense of predictability and control in any situation. So the more you can focus on those two things. So say I'm doing a really hard workout. I know how long the thing's going to work for, going to go for, my set's going to go for, my workout's going to go for, right? That's predictable. And then what can I control? I can control my breath. I can control where my attention is focusing on. I can control my internal dialogue. I can control how I respond to those sensations. And so by breaking it down into those categories, by doing that, you reduce your stress response. It's still high enough. You want a stress response. That's what allows you to perform. but you're keeping it in that sweet spot where it's difficult but manageable. And that's what allows you to continually, like, your ceiling gets higher by raising the floor. So that's where you do something hard, but where you're managing your experience. You do a really job effectively because you're actively coping the entire time. Just the same way we get more fit by doing something hard than recovering from it, right? Allowing our body to recover. Our mind is the same way. We do something that's hard, we manage ourselves effectively. Now becomes our default coping mechanism. We actively coped with that situation effectively. And the next time we can go a little bit harder, and we're now still in that sweet spot, and we go a little bit harder and a little bit harder. And before you know it, you can be redlining and objectively and far more creating what should be more painful or more fatiguing, and not actually be experiencing those things and still feel calm and cool and collected and performing really well.
I kind of use I'm curious what you might think here. I kind of use a terminology approach of like scaffolding. So the way I kind of view it with coaching a client is like, especially with a new client who comes in guns blazing. I want to be a comp prep athlete. I want to be Mr. Olympia. I want to be these things. Like, cool. I used to be all hype about that and get excited, and now I'm like, let's see how you enter the water first. And so what I'll do is obviously I'll start at that lower level and kind of work their way in, teach them based on the skills they know, meet them where they are, and raise it up. And what I'll kind of do is I get a feel for where they are and the baseline of behaviors, and we'll add a little bit of scaffolding. And if I can see they can handle that, now there's a new layer, and we'll add the scaffolding from that layer, and so on and so forth. That's kind of how I view building not only mental skills, but just lifestyle skills, nutrition skills, stress management, coping, etc. Stuff that I know that goes in well now to a successful comp prep physique athlete, performance athlete. It's a very, I guess, similar approach to the way you guys kind of described that. It's just increasing that mental load, but also raising that floor first to make sure that you have that new standard to work from, which I think is an awesome way to kind of put it there. One of the things that I want to touch on just around that is, I'm not sure if it's a trigger question or if it's just something you guys at the time of writing the book weren't quite not aligned with, but didn't back the evidence of. A lot of people in that instance of talking about just learning to cope with the hard thing and doing the tough stuff would refer to that as mental toughness, would refer to that as grit. In the book, after I think it's like chapter 1, is we're not going past this. It's used a lot. It's very pop psychology. It's very trend psychology. It's realistically though lands back under the concept of conscientiousness. Is that still your approach, still your belief when we're looking at that mental toughness, resilience side of things? This is a very easy word to throw around now for anyone that thinks they're doing something hard. They've got strong mental toughness. They've got grit. Is because you could look at that discussion of making things harder or doing harder and doing harder, but also being better at it, handling that as a resilient factor could come under mental toughness. But at the same time, even the research I've read and in the book, the way you guys have put it, there's not a clear clinical distinct term for, or I guess, criteria or a definition of mental toughness. Is that still an approach you guys view as? Is that something that you've changed your mind on?
We haven't really revisited it that's a lot of D's, very much over the past couple of years. As far as I know, it's still in the same place of there are a lot of different definitions, and it's kind of something that people toss out to mean a lot of different things. Same with grit, kind of, where if you distill it down to a central concept that is a somewhat useful independent variable in someone's psychology, it's goal fixedness. And it is important. Like you need someone who's going to get knocked down and get back up again and keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. But goal fixedness on its own isn't that predictive of success because it doesn't tell you how well they're trying or if they're trying the right thing or trying to do the right thing. Um, Grit, I think there are published papers criticizing it that are pretty rigorous, that it's basically a repackaging of conscientiousness plus a growth mindset. And in a lot of the papers that they've done on it, say with students, they're not controlling for other variables like social support. So the kid who's gritty because they can screw up and start over also have the ability to do that because they have the resources, they have people helping them do that, or they have the ability to take a step back and not be homeless or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you control for these other variables, essentially all you're measuring when you say grit in the definition that Duckworth
That's good. Yeah.
put forth for it is it's conscientiousness with a growth mindset.
Yeah, cool. So they're pretty much still on the same sort of pattern of thinking around what was in the book. I remember when I first read it because I got suckered into that sort of what you would call positive psychology, pop psychology at the time, and I was like, when I read the book, I'm like, oh shit, this is challenging how I think about that. I was very much like coming from a rugby league background, a sporting background. To us, mental toughness is like, players would play the game with a broken cheekbone. You watch a grand final and the guy break his jaw and he keeps playing the game, so he doesn't want to come off. And we're like, that's mental toughness. And I was reading that and I'm like, oh, I don't know how I align with this. It actually stopped me and made me think as a coach, like, do I even understand what mental toughness is? Do I even understand what grit is? Because, like you said, coming from that era of psychology, I also did read fixed versus growth mindsets. I also did read about goal orientation theory and understanding that, and personality psychology. So once I read it, I was like, oh shit, I actually got to stop and try to understand, do I actually believe what I think I believe about mental toughness and what it is to be mentally tough? Because then you've got guys like yourself who coach, world-class operators to me who are the pinnacle of mental toughness based on what I would think it is. And you guys are saying it's really just this.
Well, and you want mental toughness to be
Yeah.
clear, right? Like it is, you very much need to be mentally tough
Yes.
or you're
Yes.
not
Yeah.
going to make it through a soft selection course. That's just to be clear. But it just independently, it is as a single variable, it's not enough. And so it's more important to think about as an individual, as a coach, like what are the collection of things that I want to get? The same way being the strongest dude in the room only gets you so far, right? Like if you move, if you're stiff as a board, it doesn't really matter. You can't express that strength in any way that is useful. If you're poorly conditioned, it's the same deal, right? So it's always going to be a confluence of factors that are going to get you something. And to your point, you kind of mentioned this earlier with resilience. Resilience is an outcome, and it's really another word for like a process for being adaptive. It's the ability to adapt and adjust approaches. And that is a collection of other skills that allow you to become adaptable, whether it's physiologically, psychologically, emotionally, and all those things together, right? So we know what they look like as an outcome. Like you'll see someone and be like, that guy's mentally tough. That person's resilient. And everyone knows what they just intuitively understand what that means.
Yeah.
The same way you can look at someone and be like, they're a great athlete. Okay. But what made them that great athlete? What made them resilient? It's a bunch of trainable, knowable component skills that you can build over a long period of time. Right. And just the same way your level of athleticism is influenced by your background and your genetics, how adaptable or resilient you're going to be is influenced by those things. But everyone has the capacity to improve all of those things a significant amount. And I think that's the important thing to focus on as a coach and as a good just message to general population. It doesn't matter. Most people don't want anything to do with being a special operator, right? But there's still a lot of takeaways you can take from that process because that's ultimately the expression. That's what a soft selection course is about, is like how resilient and adaptable you are. It's meant to break you down physically, emotionally, psychologically, and just see if you can continue to solve problems and find a way forward, right? It's just an extreme version of that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I literally only have, I can't even add words to that. That's literally how I kind of view that approach. The only other question I have, because I know Craig, you've got to go. I really wanted to get into it. Is oh damn it, it just escaped me. We're talking about growth mindset, and we're talking about that's what it is. So we were kind of just talking before about zooming out, right, from the coaching perspective, and looking at the bigger picture. One of the goals that I have with bodybuilding with my athletes is because it's so intense and it gets so long, drawn out, and very emotionally, physiologically, psychologically draining. I have them try to decompartmentalize and break down to smaller factors. And I've read this across several, I think, high performance books, is that rather than looking at the bigger picture and becoming overwhelmed by the journey of it all and looking at how big it is, I try to bring them back to the present to appreciate the action of each day being able to do it, because it is a gift that you get to do something as intense as what you're trying to undertake. But also from a goal perspective, to try and psychologically reduce the load. I'm not sure how you guys kind of approach that, but I like to try and have them break it down to a more decompartmentalized phasic approach. So like, I have smaller checkpoints across the client's prep where I'm like, we're getting here, we're working here, we're reaching here, this is the next one. And I'll kind of reward them accordingly. But that's kind of like an easy way for me to try and reduce that psychological load of like, oh, we've got 30 weeks of dieting, training, posing, cardio, sleep reduction or sleep improvement, social reduction, things like that. Is there a similar approach to you guys? You find that as the I guess the operator or the athlete zoom in, as the coach, I guess, zoom out, and be able to look at the bigger picture, but as the individual, we're looking at a smaller kind of like take a chunk and just focus on that and get through that.
Yeah, I mean, that mental skill we would call segmenting. There are a few other pieces to it, but the ability to break something down into its smallest, most immediately important, manageable component is a really important skill the entire time through the training process, especially in selection. Like selection will usually break down into at its longest, you make it to breakfast, then you make it to lunch and then dinner. In a lot of cases, you do 5 more push-ups, you swim 1 more length, you get a couple more steps of running in, and that's as far as your world goes.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're trying to do with that is keep people focused on the process that they're applying and to anchor their sense of accomplishment to their application of that process. So the outcome doesn't matter. Like if you're day 3 of a 6-month selection course, trying to think about what is going to happen for the next 6 months or all the things you have to do is going to mentally
Mm-hmm.
smash you. It'll overwhelm you. And that's often why people quit. They'll quit, on Monday morning before anything is started because they're thinking about everything that's ahead of them and not the thing that they need to do right now and just that one thing. They're always capable of that one more thing,
Mm-hmm.
but they think too far out and they get defeated by the monsters in their mind and not the thing that's right in front of them. So we try to keep them away from an outcome fixation or an orientation toward outcomes, like in your case, like have this much development, have this much in a strength number, like these measurable outcomes that you're probably tracking, that you're going to assess them on maybe a weekly basis or monthly basis, but they have no direct control over those outcomes. They only control the process that they apply and the effort into which they apply it. So we try to get them to have a sense of like victory or reward
Mm-hmm.
over their application of the process, independent of the results that it produces, because they can control that. And if they're consistently doing the steps and doing the things, then eventually the outcome will work itself out. But you can't go the other way around. You can't obsess over
Yeah.
the outcome and forget about the process because you'll never get there. You'll just be sad.
And to everyone that's listening to this, we've talked about this 100 times, but you will hear what he's just said is process, performance, and outcome goals. We have a big approach or a big belief that if you nail the processes and you nail your performances, the outcome becomes inevitable. It's just up to where it falls, where the coin may lay, is out of your control. But you focus on the first two, the third one takes care of itself. Gentlemen, we're going to wrap it up there because I could be here all day and I don't want to hold up Craig, but I could literally pick your brains for 4 straight days if I was allowed to. One piece of advice as quickly as you can from each of you to just the general person to operate, or I guess start looking at the idea that they could operate at a higher level. What would it be?
Mm,
Um,
Go,
Focus
John.
on what you can control. Yeah, just that. Look at what in your life you do have control over and spend your attention doing that thing.
Yeah. I would say remember that you do have control over your actions all of the time. And when we say I can't, what we typically mean is I don't want to. We volunteer our way into things and we volunteer our way out, but we always have the ability to control our actions within a moment.
I love
And
it.
our bodies are capable of a lot more than we'd think.
Oh, 100%. I love it. Fantastic. Guys, honestly, it's been an absolute privilege and honor to have you on. I could be here for 2 hours if I was allowed to. So get out of here because I will just keep talking and you guys will be stuck with me. But I genuinely appreciate your time and thank you for jumping on with us and sharing your wisdom and brains.
Yeah, thank you, Ben.